Jesse Binnall is here, Trump lawyer and partner in the Binnall Law Group. Jesse, how are you, sir?
I'm doing good, sir. Thanks so much for having me this morning.
No, it's my pleasure. What cases have you worked on with Donald J. Trump?
Well, I've worked on a number of civil cases, a lot regarding constitutional immunity of the president from a civil perspective. We've heard a little bit about that here previously from the criminal side. And I've worked on some other civil cases for him all across the country.
Anything noteworthy come out of that Supreme Court hearings the other day?
Oh, well, I mean, I think there's going to be a lot that comes out from that hearing, and I think it's really remarkable that the justices really understand the huge threat to our republic that's being posed here. And they're being very careful to try to stay above the fray in the political situation here. For instance, they said on a number of occasions that, this isn't specifically about this case. They're trying to make a rule for the ages. But what I think they know is that if you have a situation where a former president is going to be prosecuted by his successor, by a political rival, that it's going to have a huge impact on the presidency for years to come. And one of the biggest impacts it's going to have is that career prosecutors who are not there for one term of office or 4 years or 8 years, but are there for an entire career, are going to be able to exert their authority over the sitting president of the United States, because that sitting president is going to know, if I do something that's not favored by the bureaucrats, then they're going to be able to prosecute me when I leave office. And that gives them really an unmanageable leverage over the president of the United States that can really be corrupted. And so I think the justices are going to step in. I think they're going to do the right thing and come up with a rule based in our Constitution that puts the power back in the hands of the American people and the president they elect, and out of the hands of the bureaucrats.
They could even get you for falsifying business records in
God.
New York. So let's jump to that case here. So we kind of lost sight of it, or I lost sight of it the last few days. So I want to get an update on some of the intricacies that have occurred in the last few days. But the big story right now is that there was the gag order, and the judge, who again donated to Joe Biden's presidential campaign and donated to a group called Stop Republicans, who's still the judge in the case. I just want to make that clear. He said, Donald, you have violated the gag order. You have to take down 7 Truth Social posts, and you have to pay a $1,000 fine for each violation. And if you don't, or if you keep doing this, then I have the ability to throw you into jail. So let's start with the basics. What is a gag order, and how did Trump violate it?
Well, and there's another very important aspect of that order. And he said, your campaign website has to take down two posts from your campaign website. And let's just talk about how it's absolutely unprecedented that is, where you have a Biden donating judge who is now told a presidential campaign what they can and cannot have on their website. That is, flies in the absolute face of the First Amendment. And gag order is a prior restraint on speech. It is something that is, it's like an injunction that says, I'm going to tell you what you can and what you cannot speak about. It's something that the British used a lot before the American War for Independence, and it's what the founders were primarily concerned about when they wrote the First Amendment. They were primarily concerned with government officials entering any kind of injunction against speech. And that's why the First Amendment protection against these prior restraints is so strong. So, for instance, during the Vietnam War, the Washington Post and the New York Times wanted to publish classified information about the war while the war was continuing that would have put, and in fact did, put American service members' lives in jeopardy. And it made itself, the case made its way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, even though it could put service members' lives in jeopardy, you can't restrict the New York Times or the Washington Post from publishing this classified information because of the First Amendment and because it would be a prior restraint on speech. That's how important this principle is. But when it's Donald Trump running for re-election, this judge is willing to throw the Constitution completely, under, and be willing to sacrifice civil rights for a political and not a legal objective, which is why this is absolutely unconstitutional, and why I believe that a higher court must step in and correct this. Because when President Trump goes out and he calls out, for instance, the huge hypocrisy from the left, the fact that Michael Cohen is a known perjurer, the fact that you have one of the things that the judge says that President Trump can't talk about is the prosecutor that was moved over from the Biden Justice Department to this county district attorney's office in order to prosecute Donald Trump.
Come on.
He can't even talk about that. This is absolutely insane.
Okay, real quick, we can talk about that. So what is that? What happened?
No, so one of the things that the gag order applies to is that you've got this Colangelo, who's one of the prosecutors, the lead prosecutor on this case, who was the number 3 official at Joe Biden's Department of Justice. And he then moved over to Alvin Bragg's office in order to prosecute Donald Trump. It's something that's absolutely unheard of, because what you don't want is prosecutors who just try to go to offices in order to just go after individual people. Prosecutors are supposed to pursue specific crimes, not specific individuals. And so this is a huge, huge justice issue. But the judge has said, because that Donald Trump can talk about Alvin Bragg, but he can't talk about the other prosecutors, including Colangelo. So this is, I think, again, an absolutely huge First Amendment issue, because one of the big issues facing Americans right now is the weaponization of justice. But what Juan Merchan wants to do is he wants to be able to dictate what issues a presidential candidate can talk about and what he can't talk about. You see this in his order when he talks about legitimate campaign issues. So he, as a judge, gets to decide what a legitimate campaign issue is and what one is not, which is just simply not the way the American Constitution works. It's not the way the First Amendment works. This is the biggest assault on the First Amendment in, I'd actually say ever, certainly in the last 50 years. And the silence of the American left, who used to be champions of the First Amendment, is the huge hypocrisy. The silence of the mainstream media that loves the First Amendment when it protects them, but can't stand it if it protects Donald Trump, is simply disgusting.
Trump said on Truth Social that Colangelo is the top prosecutor who's leading this case. He did the opening statements on behalf of New York, right? Called him a top Democrat DOJ official. Can't do that. Trump can't do that.
Correct. Right now, under this gag order, he's not allowed to do that. That's a huge example of what this judge is trying to keep from the American people. And that's actually...
Wow, that's amazing.
That's something that's really...
So I was saying, is there any... what's the justification for that? Like, is there any, oh, no, like his mother is getting old, so he decided to move from from D.C. to New York to be closer to her, and this is just the job he happened to get, and the timing just worked out this way. Is there any justification like that at all?
There is no justification that would withstand First Amendment scrutiny. Gag orders in the past have been placed on prosecutors in order to protect the right of the defendant to have a fair trial. That's something where a gag order could theoretically apply in such a way that was constitutional. But here, in a way to silence the presumptive Republican nominee for President of the United States, there is no First Amendment justification for this at all.
Oh, that's it. Okay. But there are gag orders. Like, gag orders are used today. So what would be a justifiable reason for a gag order in America in a criminal case?
So a gag order on a district attorney's office, for instance, that said you're not allowed to go out and have press conferences that would affect the jury pool.
Yes.
That's
But again, that's to protect the defendant.
correct. That's something that would affect the defendant. I actually believe that you can gag government actors all you want, because the First Amendment interest in the government is not the same as the
Yes.
First Amendment interest of individual Americans. But you can't gag American citizens. It's just, I think the Supreme Court has actually been pretty clear on that. And, one of the important things that we have to remember about the First Amendment, and that, the justices have said before, is it's a double wrong when you restrict free speech. Because it's not just the right of the speaker to get their point across, but it's the right of the listener in order to hear various opinions. And so what they are doing right now is not just an attack on President Trump, it's an attack on the American people, because nobody is reporting on some of these very important issues, like Colangelo, like the fact that Judge Merchan has a heavily conflicted it's heavily conflicted himself, not only because of the fact that he donated to Joe Biden, but also because his daughter is making money on his handling of the case, something else he has gagged here. So he is trying to silence these issues from making their way to the American people. And we all know the reason for that is because the only reason he's allowing this complete sham of a case to move forward that has no legal basis, no factual basis, is to try to defeat Donald Trump in the November election, because he's not content to make his voice heard in the ballot box at the ballot box. He wants to use his courtroom in order to affect politics. He's not pursuing justice. He's pursuing his political agenda. That is something that is so antithetical to our American republic that it has to be rejected out of hand. Otherwise, the rule of law in our country will completely fall.
You mentioned earlier that a higher court should step in. Can a court step in, or do they have to wait until this process is over and then they can come in after?
So there are actual ways that courts can step in the interim. And that's especially true in issues like contempt, where you can have what's called an interlocutory appeal. That usually goes up through in this court case, since it's a state court, you would go to the intermediary state courts first. But you have an important federal issue here as well. So there's a way that, for instance, could theoretically make it up to the Supreme Court.